Welcome. The point of today's video is to try to help transition you as we move from the regular class into this final section of ethics and application. We're going to continue our discussion of ethics throughout the rest of this course, but the normal way that we've been operating is going to be a little bit different. And you might have some questions about some of the major assignments that you have left to do. Most notably, the first real assignment that you have is the application of our discussion about the passions. And we're going to apply it in our discussion of John Steinbeck's work, Tortilla Flat. Now, some of you will really like this work, some of you might not. And while I hope you enjoy it, it's one of my favorite works of Steinbeck, that's not the reason why I chose it. I chose this work because, one, Steinbeck's a really good author. His characters have dimensions to them. They have flaws. They have advantages. They have disadvantages. Some people will not like some of the terms or ideas because they're a little bit dated, but the characters still are realistic enough that you can kind of weigh in and concern yourselves with them. While these are not people you know, they're at least archetypes of people that Steinbeck knew and encountered in his life in and around Monterey. There's some dimension of depth to them. They're not just one-dimensional characters, and at moments you will like them, and at moments you will despise some of them. Hopefully not all of them, but there's enough there. The work provides an excellent sort of basis of understanding the passions and what they can do in one person's life. It allows for you to examine the subject and kind of critique it, to look in very obvious terms of why somebody is making a decision and the passions that they're succumbing to. And it allows you also that opportunity to judge them, which you really wouldn't want to do in a real life circumstance with other people around, because again, you don't really want to be in that position with a real person. But for a character in a book, you can say, yeah, this is your flaw, this is your difficulty, this is where you should overcome this. It also allows you the opportunity to give advice about what you think they should do with this work going forward. Hey, Pilon, you should be doing this. Danny, you should have done that. The pirate, you really seem to value this, that, or the other. Have you considered blah, blah, blah? And so the work, the characters are lively enough and engaging enough, and the story is good enough to advance the idea of the passions that you're able to apply your thoughts to this work. And they're brief. It's not overly complicated. In fact, there's actually a lot of literary work that talks about the depth of Tortilla Flat, how it's an archetype for King Arthur's court, and many of the characters are light in there. And I'm not asking you guys to do any of that. I'm asking you to do that cursory reading to understand what are the passions here and what techniques that we've addressed so far in class could be used to overcome the passions for these characters. While you will be reading the entire book, you'll be assigned 2 chapters to apply what you've discussed so far, what we've learned and kind of understood about the passions, and where your understandings of passions and the ethics are now in play. You'll create a presentation that will be about 5 minutes long. This is, in many ways, the beginnings of a guided conversation, but done asynchronously with your fellow classmates. Your presentation needs to be an audio and visual presentation. It must include a visual representation and be something that you're narrating, you're saying, your voice is in. Now, what do I mean by that? How does this audio and visual presentation have to be done? There's a handful of different ways that you can choose to do it. You can give a narrated PowerPoint presentation, much like the one you're seeing here. You can take out your phone or your laptop camera and just record you speaking and giving the presentation. You can give a presentation by sketching the scenes of the work and displaying it for other people to see. What you want to do with your presentation in many ways is up to you. The options are not limited to these three that I've mentioned. As long as whatever you provide gives us both an audio component where we get to hear your words and a visual component where we get to see something. You cannot just write a paper and upload it because no one's going to read it. That's not guiding a discussion. That doesn't give you that level of engagement. And you shouldn't just have a PowerPoint that's, visual either, that has this stuff in there. It should be something narrated where we're hearing your voice. And I would like for your fellow students to have something to look at, even if it's your face, right? Even if it's nothing exceptional. If it's a title slide with a couple of lines, okay. Now, obviously, the more engaging you make it, the better the presentation would be, the overall better your grade would be. But the particular means of how you'd like to do it is really based on your skill level and your level of comfort. This is not a multimedia class, and I'm not expecting that you know how to produce a fantastic presentation. But keeping it engaging is important. You want to be engaged as much as anything else. So what is it you need to do in the presentation? First of all, you need to briefly outline the pertinent information of the chapter. Briefly. Now, you and all of your fellow classmates will be reading these chapters. This is not a book report. You do not need to say, here's the entire events of the chapter. You should assume that your classmates know what happened. Your audience knows the events of the chapter. You don't need to give a whole rundown of the entire thing. But there are going to be some events that are pertinent to what you would like to identify in the work. So a little context is always helpful. The second thing that you need to do is identify the passions that you see in the chapter. Go through and, I saw this and I recognize that. Based on my understanding of the passions, such and such is this. Now, again, you all don't have the same agreements as to what the passions are and what those natures are. That's part of what we've been navigating and discussing through this course. But based on your understanding, you should be identifying what they are in this work. Then you should speculate as to different techniques that could work to benefit these people, these characters in this work. Do you think that one of the techniques that we've talked about, or an aspect of that, would alleviate the stress and concern that this passion is going to have in this character's life? Which techniques would help? And explain what that technique is, where it comes from, and how you think it would apply. And you could do this several times depending on the passions that are going to be done throughout this work. Again, identifying who it is and how this works, and how you also think that if they were to take this technique, this method, and apply it to their lives, what would the outcome be? Conversely, if they let the passion continue to control their life, what would the outcome be? Right? There's great consequence to doing nothing sometimes, and there's great consequence to changing your path and your road. So you can speculate. These are fictitious characters. You're not going to hurt anybody's feelings. But figure out, hey, in my sort of estimation, this would really help you out. If you were to do this, the next thing I would see would be this, that, and the other. If not, I'm expecting that you're going to continue to fall into this snare, into this trap, and have this, that, and the other problem happen. Finally, you need to have some pointed questions for your students. Your fellow classmates need to have something to discuss. This is not just a report on what you saw, but this is a guided discussion, and this is how you guide this discussion. You're going to ask questions. Now, questions are going to be open-ended things, not what'd you think? What did you think the passions were? What else do you think would have helped them? Right? That's not going to really allow for anything, or it's going to kind of seem like you're passing the buck and say, you do the rest of the work for me. Right? So you need to have a pointed question, something that students, your fellow peers, would want to think about. Make them go, yeah. And again, this is all going to be done in a 5-minute period. It's not terribly long, but it doesn't seem at any point that you would be rambling for too long within this. If you're a little over or a little under, that's okay, but do the best you can to be around this within 30 seconds, one side or the other. So after you've made your presentation, however it is that you made it, you need to upload it. Likely, most of you are going to upload it to YouTube and give me a YouTube link. Part of your BSU tuition includes the whole Google world, which includes an account for YouTube. You can easily click around and figure that out, or email me or ask one of the IT people how to do that if you're unfamiliar with that. But you can upload it only to your BSU account and not need it to be out there in your private account if you also happen to have one or anything else along those lines. But you're going to make sure that your link is something that is then public. That way anyone, as long as they can click on this link, can go ahead and watch your presentation. If by chance you have a different form of software that you like to use, you're able to go ahead and upload it too. It doesn't have to be a YouTube link, as long as a handful of conditions apply. One, anyone who clicks on the link can access it, that there's no permissions that's going to keep somebody else from watching this video. And two, as long as no one has to download some other software to be able to approach it either. That it's something that is completely self-contained on the web. By clicking it, it's there, or cutting and pasting the link, that's going to allow it. These are the only real conditions of there. There's a handful of other programs that BSU uses, and therefore a handful of other programs that would be okay for you to use as well. But generally, most of you will use YouTube because it's easy, and it's already an account that you have, and everyone else already has it, and people can watch YouTube links anywhere. Then, once you have that URL, you're going to cut and paste that link into 2 different places. You'll notice as you open up Canvas and you go down to this application, Tortilla Flat, that you're going to have a handful of different things that you need to do. You're going to see a window that says Textual Analysis and Discussion Presentation 1 and Textual Analysis and Discussion Presentation 2. You're giving me 2 different presentations. The first one, you're going to give me the link here at Presentation 1, and the second one you're going to give me in Presentation 2. The term is really long, but it's there to really differentiate it from the other place you're going to upload it, and that is whichever chapter you're leading that discussion in. Chapter 1, 2, 3, whatever. You're going to give the link at the very beginning of that discussion board. That first location, Textual Analysis and Discussion Presentation, is where I am grading your actual presentation. You need to make sure it's there. That way I can grade it, because that's how you're going to get your grade. Each one of these is worth 10% of your grade. You want to make sure you do that and that you include it here. You will include the exact same link in the discussion forum. That way your fellow students can watch and pay attention and engage in discussion with you. So when it's time for you to upload your presentation into Canvas, there are 2 locations that you will need to do this in. It's really not that difficult, but it does cause some difficulty for some to remember and recall that. When do you need to upload those presentations by? Well, first of all, did you check the syllabus? The schedule at the back of the syllabus gives you all of the times for this. But generally speaking, it's class time. When does class officially start? Now, if this is an asynchronous course, things will be a little bit different, and therefore check the syllabus. It'll probably be due 8 a.m. But if this is a scheduled class, that's when it'll be due. So now you've uploaded your presentation, or you're not presenting on a chapter. What do you need to do? You need to watch your fellow students and their presentations. And then you need to respond in the discussion board to 2 posts. Even if you presented, you need to respond to 2 fellow presenters. Now, if there's only one other person presenting other than yourself, you're able to respond to something that somebody said to you, and that would count as your second engagement in the discussion board post. Your initial presentation doesn't count as one. Now, what happens if by chance there aren't any other people who presented? You go to a chapter and nobody did anything. Somehow the only links that were there were dead, or somebody made a mistake, or something catastrophic happened and nobody did that chapter. First of all, that shouldn't be the case. But it occasionally does happen that 1 or 2 students just drop the ball. And if they happen to line up and not give you enough material to go off of, and you're getting grade on engaging in the discussion board, what should you do? The answer is simple. You post yourself. Now, you don't need to make the whole video, but you say, you know what, fellow students who are also all waiting to see something, my takeaway from the chapter was X, Y, and Z. And you put out your own musings and thoughts on the chapter that are not engaged in it with a presentation, because there's not that presentation. And you do this, and then hopefully one of your fellow students comments back and you reply back to that post, and therefore you have that. I'm going to expect that you have 2 posts in that discussion board for full credit, regardless of any catastrophes that might be happening. And these will all be due by the time of the next class period. So this is what you're going to be doing in the Tortilla Flat presentation. You're going to engage with your fellow students. You're going to present something twice for them to engage with, and then you're going to continue to engage with everyone else along the way. It's an easy way of having an asynchronous book discussion. And hopefully you'll find it as fruitful as I have, and you'll be able to see which passions are at play with Danny and his friends, and have at least a handful of techniques that you think would help them overcome these passions. It's also a great opportunity for you to kind of see what your fellow students think are fruitful endeavors in overcoming the passions possibly in their own lives, and help you connect once again to these topics and have a good place to apply them. The other major assignment you have in this class is your interview paper. Remember, you're going to interview 3 people and ask them, how do they overcome the passions in their life? You're going to need to ask them, what do they think the passions are? And probably have an answer for that yourself, as in all likelihood, this is not a very popular term that everyone knows exactly what they mean. Or you might be meaning different things if they have a different conception of it than you have. But the general theme should be something along the lines of, how do they overcome the difficulties, passions in their life? Do they have new passions that replace them? Do they use one of the techniques that we've talked about in the class? These are going to be people that you're going to encounter, and you're going to create this interview for them. Now, you need to remember that there are going to be 3 people that you are going to interview, and that they need to be diverse. You also need to understand that you're the person who's defining diverse for these people. They should not all be family members, but there's a lot of different ways that you could approach the idea of diversity with the subjects that you are using. You also are going to begin with an assignment by asking them for their consent, that it's okay for their name to be used for this school paper. It's a very easy, low-stakes assignment that you're just going to list off their names and that they have consented, but it's important that you ask them if it's okay that you're going to represent and characterize their words in this upcoming assignment. If they're not okay with it, you need to find somebody else. But this first assignment is kind of the ethical thing to do of making sure that before somebody is engaged in this material, that they at least have a little bit of an idea of what they're getting themselves into and being represented in this way, and that you know that they're okay with that as well. You need to then, after having this consent and names given, present a handful of questions for your fellow students. What are the questions you're planning on asking your subjects? There should be about 5 or so of these that you have off the top of your mind, and they'll range, but you're the one who gets to dictate what these questions are. This is your interview, and your questions are your own to write and ask. Now, you're going to also upload this in a discussion board because you want to use the general skills of your fellow classmates too. Every once in a while, there'll be somebody else out there who had a question that you didn't think about that you think would be fantastic if you use it. So after having your list and getting their consent, you're going to generate some questions, and you're going to post these so you can all learn these questions from one another. And many of them will be the same, but some of them will be different, and you're going to be able to draw from one another before, in all likelihood, you've actually interviewed these people. Then you're also going to actually interview these people. You're going to ask them the questions, and you're going to provide me a rough transcript of the interview. Now, it's not going to be every question. It's just going to be the ones that I've mentioned, the format and how all that should look in the syllabus. And again, go back and look in the syllabus. But you're going to give me a rough transcript so you don't have to do that part later. Here's the questions, here's their response, and this is how it worked with subject 1, subject 2, subject 3, and this is how that worked. You're also going to write another paper on how they were diverse from one another. What were your qualifications for defining diversity? How do these 3 people represent diversity of your community and how you're going to be engaged in that broader community? There's a lot of different qualifications for diversity, but you're going to write a paper and explain to me briefly how these subjects represent diversity and why, therefore, you chose them to relate with one another, even though they're likely not to engage with one another through any other means but through you. You're then going to ultimately produce a reflection paper. All of these other steps are done largely so you can sit and think and ponder and muse as to what are the passions, broadly speaking, and what are different techniques that different people have in overcoming the passions. Well, the whole entire course we've been outlining different major philosophical and religious techniques in overcoming the passions and identifying the passions. At this point, you're going to encounter real life people, and you're going to ask them, and you're going to think, well, okay, do they have some overlap with some of the other systems that we've talked about? What techniques did they have that's going to give me an opportunity to overcome the passions in my own life? And I've got a handful of questions listed in the syllabus of what I'm expecting you to do with this final reflection paper. And again, go back and look at the syllabus. But there should be some time between the actual interviews, the giving of the rough transcript, and again, it doesn't need to be word for word any sect, and your understanding about how these people are diverse from one another, and then ultimately what the passions mean and the techniques that you could take from these people and apply in your own life. In addition to those major assignments, you will, of course, continue to work on your weekly reflection responses and engage with one another in the discussion board. You will need to submit a course evaluation, and your final assignment at the end of this semester would be that reflection paper, a very short reflection paper that goes over the entire course, so not the one in reference to your interviews, but again, the whole class. Reflection is really key because it's through reflection that you know how to apply some of these ideas, to engage with it, and you know what takeaways you have. You know your involvement and engagement with your community through your interviews. You understand the notion of the passions, not only through the discussions we've had throughout the semester, but also how it's applied with the work, the book, Tortilla Flats, and your interviews with other people. You have theoretical, you have fictional, and you have actual people who've engaged with this, and you get to learn, and hopefully all of this will come through in your final reflection paper as you stop and think and reflect. If you have any other questions about assignments, please feel free to let me know. Bye.